My name is Shirley DeWeese, and my presentation is on the barriers to APRN scope of practice. My issue summary will include 5 types of APRN scopes of practice, which vary by state. Full practice authority states grant full practice and prescription authority and may encourage collaboration in statute, but do not require collaborative practice agreements nor articulate practice protocols. Collaborative practice agreement states require collaborative practice agreements, but without a requirement for written protocol, and prescription authority is given for non-controlled drugs and controlled substances up to Schedule 2 or 3. Protocol states require collaborative practice agreements and written practice protocols. APRNs can prescribe non-controlled drugs and controlled substances up to Schedule 2 or 3. Protocol with limited prescription states require collaborative practice agreements and written practice protocols. APRNs are allowed to prescribe non-controlled drugs and may be allowed to prescribe Schedule 4 or 5 drugs, but no Schedule 2 or 3. Supervision with no prescription states require APRNs to practice under a physician's supervision or delegation with no prescribing privileges. Any prescribing is done via order or delegation from a physician. The barriers I will explore will be the background and current trends, political perspectives, legal and ethical issues, impact of innovations, impact on nursing education, and strategy to effect change. In the early 1990s, many states required APRNs to practice under the supervision of a physician and did not allow prescription authority. Since then, states have adopted new scope of practice laws that both expand prescription authority and loosen or eliminate the supervisory requirements. APRNs in the United States were recognized more than ever before during the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. Despite the critical role that APRNs played during the pandemic due to the federal and state waivers and executive orders to maximize patient care access during the pandemic, there continues to be unnecessary, inefficient, and dated barriers to practice that could be modernized to help improve access to and quality of care. These barriers prevent APRNs from providing the full scope of health services they're educated and certified to provide. And most importantly, they affect the care provided to individuals and communities. Practice barriers emanate from many different and sometimes multiple sources. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020, the South Carolina Board of Nursing, in coordination with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, DHEC, and in response to Governor McMaster's directives, waived certain licensing requirements for practitioners which were deemed necessary by DHEC, and they also loosened some of the restrictions on medications. They suspended the enforcement of prohibition on prescribing Schedule 2 and 3 medications via telemedicine without prior board approval. They lifted restrictions on use of telemedicine for providing medication-assisted treatment. They suspended enforcement of certain requirements regarding nurse practitioners engaged in practice with physicians in border states. They relaxed guidance regarding prescribing and dispensing of hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, and azithromycin. And they suspended enforcement of certain requirements for practice by physician's assistants and advanced practice registered nurses in certain settings. However, these orders were rescinded in June 2021. Some of the legal and ethical issues I will cover are licensure and administration issues. There needs to be a compact state agreement or a license that is recognized across state lines because this prevents some APRNs from being able to practice out of state. Transition to practice agreement, which is commonly requiring physician oversights and practice restrictions based on state regulations rather than nationally recognized scope of practice parameters, such as a requirement for a specific collaborating physician, are barriers. Collaboration agreements are expensive, there's a time delay to get the agreement in place, and it's often difficult to find a collaborating physician. Often the APRN signature is not sufficient. A physician's signature is required on selected documents or to document certain activities. Federal Medicare regulations require physicians to conduct and sign admission and regulatory visits in long-term care facilities in all states. Other forms that some states have require a physician's signature, such as the handicap tag, for example. There are therapy restrictions. In some states, physicians are required to order therapies such as home health, hospice, physical therapy, blood products, pulmonary rehab, pain management, IV fluids or medications, and even diabetic shoes. There are prescribing limits that prevent APRNs from functioning to their full capacity. Some states require that only physicians prescribe such Schedule II meds and benzodiazepines, and the APRN must only write prescriptions for controlled substances that the physician chooses. The requirement to have a collaborative agreement with physicians to prescribe means long waits for prescriptive privileges. Other barriers identified were that the APRN could not prescribe out of state, which was particularly problematic for using telehealth. They were restricted from dispensing medications from an in-house pharmacy or for signing for medication samples from pharmaceutical representatives. Then you have physician-only procedures. They can only provide certain procedures when APRNs have the education and preparation to provide these procedures. Examples include fluoroscopy, pulmonary function, conscious sedation, and other simple procedures. A lack of payment parity by Medicaid and other third parties, and in some cases, no reimbursement for APRNs or requiring a physician's signature for the care provided, including lack of reimbursement for APRN services for workers' compensation and hospice care. In telehealth, in some cases, the physicians restricted APRNs from practicing via telehealth despite their training. Licensure issues prevented some telehealth visits, and APRNs were restricted from using telehealth due to administrative concerns about reimbursement. Then you have the collegiality. There's no input from an APRN into decision-making or policy formation at a workplace. Out-of-state physicians refuse referrals. The MPs had the inability to provide collaboration with new MPs because they were required supervision by a physician. The impact of innovations. The very simple innovation for many states would be addressing the shortage of PCPs. This is a critical concern. Current published cost analysis for expanding SOP for APRNs in primary care reveals states may benefit by increasing coverage and maintaining the quality of care while reducing cost by millions, thus expanding the SOP of APRNs. It's an optimal and expedient solution, especially for non-specialized primary care in areas where there's a PCP shortage. If the scope of practice is expanded, costs to state and patient would be lowered. The impact on education. Competency-based education originated in the 60s and over time evolved to a method to ensure professional education meets the needs of society and the labor market. Competency-based education and competency validation tools in educational and healthcare settings assists organizations to achieve high value, low cost, and quality health care. Future nursing policies regarding APRN competency validation in clinical settings would support the delivery of quality practice standards set forth from national organizations. If APRNs have proven their competency, the restrictions should be lifted. The strategy to change. There's no doubt that nurses are poised to assume roles to advance health care, improve care, and increase value. However, it will require new ways of thinking and practicing. The APRN can write letters to state senators or governors. They can create a piece of legislation to present to the legislative bodies. They can write op-eds about the barriers that limit their scope of practice, and they can engage the stakeholders. Nurses can no longer sit back and take the back seat. The time has come for them to take the lead in the revolution to making healthcare more patient-centered and quality-driven. Once you've determined change is necessary, one of the first and most important things that you can do is engage the appropriate stakeholders. Doing this builds trust and enables you to learn from their experience. Stakeholders can play a role in identifying outcome measures. Having the buy-in from the start will help you have a better plan and implementation strategy. It takes persistence, perseverance, and a willingness to be open to new options. Along the way, you will hit barriers, but you'll also learn strategies that will help you overcome them. In conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic offered the opportunity to assess the status of APRN barriers and make comparisons of those that existed pre-pandemic. It's evident that strategies to mitigate practice restrictions are needed across the U.S., regardless of practice authority status. Scope of practice oversight by state boards of medicine is outdated and needs to change, one state at a time. The unwarranted restrictions limit access to well-qualified and cost-efficient care by APRNs and are not benefiting the citizens of this country. Regulation, supervision, and collaborative agreements lead to decreased access to healthcare services, higher healthcare costs, and reduced quality of care. Advocacy requires recipients of care be the focus of health-related policy decisions. Stakeholders must recognize the contribution of APRNs and reduce unnecessary, outdated barriers to their practice. Thank you.